At 9 a.m. this morning, my father and stepmother sat across from me at King County Family Court, arguing that a 32-year-old man cannot tie his own shoes or manage the $3.6 million trust my grandfather left behind. Their lawyer called my independence a death sentence. They think I am helpless. They have no idea I have spent the last 5 years building an empire, or who is waiting behind those doors to destroy them. My name is Joshua Rodriguez. To the neighbors in our gated community in the affluent suburbs of Chicago, I was nothing more than a rumor, a shadow that occasionally passed by a second-story window. To my father, I was a tragic mistake, but to my stepmother Brenda and my half-brother Lucas, I was something far more valuable. I was a prop. I was the broken thing they kept around to make themselves look whole, the incompetent burden that justified their martyrdom. They needed me to be sick. They needed me to be slow. Because as long as Joshua Rodriguez was the fragile, stuttering invalid who could not look a stranger in the eye, nobody would ever think to look at the family finances. Nobody would suspect that the dumb kid in the attic was actually the only one in the house who knew that Thorne and Rodriguez Holdings was bleeding cash by the millions. I have always lived in a world of numbers. While other children learned to read emotional cues and social subtleties, I saw patterns. I saw logic gates. I saw the architectural structure of data. My mind is a high-speed processor that never powers down, capable of digesting complex algorithms in seconds. But the trade-off was a sensory processing disorder that made human interaction feel like standing next to a jet engine without ear protection. Eye contact felt like a physical burn. Small talk was a code I could never decipher. The medical term was severe social anxiety with spectrum traits, but Brenda preferred simpler terms when she spoke to her friends. She called me slow, she called me damaged, and she made sure I believed it. The architecture of my oppression was subtle. It was built on gaslighting so precise it was almost artistic. Lucas, 3 years younger than me but possessing the charisma of a cult leader, was the golden boy. He was the face of the family, the one who charmed investors and took credit for every success. I remember a specific incident 6 months ago that perfectly encapsulated our dynamic. A major client server architecture had suffered a catastrophic failure. The entire database was corrupted, threatening to wipe out years of transactional history. Lucas was panic-stricken. He was pacing the living room, sweating through his designer shirt, screaming at the junior developers on the phone. He had no idea how to fix it. He barely knew how to write a basic script. I waited until he went to the kitchen to pour himself a scotch. I slipped into his home office, the blue light of the monitors washing over my face. It took me 12 minutes. I bypassed the corrupted sectors, rewrote the retrieval protocol, and initiated a system restore that salvaged 99% of the data. When Lucas returned, the green success bars were already loading on the screen. He froze, looking from the screen to me. I expected a thank you. I expected him to acknowledge that his slow brother had just saved the company a contract worth $200,000. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and told me to get out. The next morning at breakfast, I watched my father clap Lucas on the back, beaming with pride as Lucas recounted how he had pulled an all-nighter to recode the entire system from scratch. I sat there staring at my oatmeal, my hand trembling slightly. I said nothing. I never said anything. But silence is not peace. Silence is where the pressure builds. The breaking point, or at least the moment that shattered whatever illusion of family I still held on to, happened on the night of my father's 60th birthday. The mansion was filled with the city's elite. Senators, business tycoons, and old money socialites filled the grand hall. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. Brenda had insisted I attend. She claimed it was because we were a family, but I knew the truth. She needed the contrast. She needed me there in my ill-fitting suit, looking uncomfortable and twitchy, to highlight how graceful and long-suffering she was for taking care of me. I was trying to make myself invisible near the buffet table. My heart was hammering against my ribs at 140 beats per minute. The noise of the conversation was a roar in my ears. I just wanted to get a glass of water and retreat to my room. "Joshua, darling," Brenda's voice sliced through the noise. She was standing near the centerpiece of the room, a magnificent tower of vintage champagne glasses that reached nearly 5 feet high. "Come say hello to the senator," I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I had been conditioned to obey. I kept my head down, focusing on the intricate pattern of the Persian rug, and began to walk toward her. I was careful. I was always careful. I calculated the distance, the trajectory, the space between the guests. As I passed the champagne tower, I felt something hook around my ankle. It was subtle, a quick, deliberate motion. I looked down just in time to see the sharp point of Brenda's stiletto heel retracting, but gravity had already claimed me. I stumbled forward. My shoulders slammed into the table base. The sound was apocalyptic. 300 crystal glasses did not just break, they exploded. The crash echoed off the high ceilings, silencing the room instantly. Champagne and shards of glass sprayed everywhere, soaking the hem of the senator's wife's dress. I lay on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage, my hand bleeding from a deep cut, gasping for air. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing me into the wet carpet. "Oh my God, Joshua!" Brenda shrieked, her hand flying to her mouth in a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "I told you to be careful. I told you he wasn't ready for this, Robert." My father pushed through the crowd. I looked up at him, searching for a lifeline. I wanted him to ask if I was okay. I wanted him to see the blood dripping from my palm. I wanted him to realize that I had walked that path 1,000 times without stumbling, and that this was not an accident. But when I met his eyes, I saw nothing but exhaustion. He looked at the shattered glass, then at the guests, and finally at me. He did not help me up. He let out a long, shuddering sigh that hurt more than any slap could have. "Why can't you be normal?" he whispered. The question hung in the air louder than the crash. "Just for one night, Joshua. Why can't you just be normal?" Lucas stepped in, then grabbing me roughly by the arm and hauling me up. "Come on, freak!" he hissed in my ear, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough to preserve his image as the dutiful brother. "Let's get you out of here before you ruin anything else." I was banished to my room, the door locking behind me. I sat in the dark, wrapping a towel around my bleeding hands, staring at the wall. I did not cry. I had stopped crying years ago. Tears were variables that did not solve the equation. Instead, I listened. The ventilation system in the old mansion carried sound remarkably well if you knew where to stand. I pressed my ear against the vent that connected to the study below. "He is getting worse, Robert." Brenda's voice drifted up, smooth and poisonous. "The outbursts, the clumsiness. It is the anxiety. It is making him unstable." "I don't know what to do, Brenda." My father's voice sounded defeated. "I thought he was getting better." "I spoke to Dr. Holloway," Brenda continued. "He agrees that Joshua needs a more aggressive approach. There is a new sedative, stronger. It will keep him calm, keep him manageable. We cannot have him embarrassing us like this when the merger is approaching." "Whatever it takes," my father said. "Just fix it. Just fix it." As if I were a leaking faucet or a cracked window. That night, Brenda came to my room with a glass of water and 2 blue pills. Her face was a mask of concern. "For your nerves, sweetheart," she said. "Dr. Holloway says these will help you sleep. They will make all the bad feelings go away." I took them. I put them in my mouth. I drank the water. I let her watch me swallow. I saw the satisfaction in her eyes as she tucked me in, treating me like a toddler. "Good boy," she said, turning off the light. The moment the door clicked shut, I sat up. I reached into the back of my throat and regurgitated the pills into my palm. I had been practicing this since I was 12. I walked to the bathroom and flushed them down the toilet, watching the blue swirls disappear. They wanted me sedated. They wanted me in a fog. That meant they were afraid of what I might see if I were awake. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I went to my closet and pulled out my laptop, a custom rig I had built from scrap parts I scavenged from the company's e-waste bins. If they wanted to treat me like a criminal, I would act like a detective. I logged into the secure server of Thorne and Rodriguez Holdings. Lucas had changed the passwords, but he used a simple substitution cipher based on his favorite football team. It took me 45 seconds to crack. What I found made my blood run cold. The company was not just struggling, it was being hollowed out. There were transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. There were invoices for services that never existed. And the signatures authorizing these transfers belonged to two people, Brenda Thorne and Lucas Rodriguez. They were stealing my father blind, and they were using the company's impending collapse as leverage to push for access to the family trusts. I spent the next 3 hours downloading everything. Every email, every bank statement, every falsified ledger. I created a secure encrypted backup on a remote server that I had rented using Bitcoin mined years ago. I was building a dossier. I did not know when I would use it or how, but I knew that knowledge was the only weapon I had. 2 weeks later, the only person in the world who viewed me as a human being left this earth. My grandfather, Arthur Rodriguez, passed away in his sleep at the age of 89. He was the one who had taught me to code. He was the one who sat with me for hours in silence reading books, never forcing me to speak, never demanding I be normal. He was the founder of the family fortune, a man of iron will and terrifying intellect. When the news came, I felt a physical ripping sensation in my chest. The grief was a black hole swallowing all the logic and order I tried to maintain. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and rain. Brenda and Lucas stood at the front weeping theatrically, holding my father's hands. I stood at the back alone, soaking wet because no one had offered me an umbrella. I watched them bury the only man who had ever loved me. But Arthur Rodriguez had one last move to play. 3 days after the funeral, the family lawyer, a stoic man named Mr. Henderson, arrived at the mansion for the reading of the will. Brenda and Lucas were practically vibrating with anticipation. They expected the entire estate to pass to my father, which meant effectively it would pass to them to manage. Mr. Henderson sat at the head of the long mahogany table. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room. His eyes lingered on me, sitting in the corner, trying to shrink into the upholstery. Arthur left specific instructions regarding the distribution of his personal assets. Mr. Henderson began. While the majority of the real estate holdings go to his son Robert, the liquid assets, specifically the family trust fund valued at $3.6 million, are to be designated differently. Brenda leaned forward, her eyes glittering. Go on. The trust is to be held until the youngest grandson, Joshua Rodriguez, turns 32 years of age, at which point the entirety of the $3.6 million will transfer to him alone. The silence in the room was absolute. I looked up shocked. $3.6 million. It was enough to escape. It was enough to start over. It was freedom. However, Mr. Henderson continued, his voice grave. There is a stipulation. To inherit, Joshua must be deemed of sound mind and capable of independent living by a court of law. If he is found to be mentally incapacitated or requires permanent guardianship, control of the trust reverts to the family patriarch. I saw the look that passed between Brenda and Lucas. It was not disappointment. It was calculation. They looked at me not as a person but as an obstacle. A $3.6 million obstacle. At that moment, I realized the pills, the gaslighting, the public humiliation were just the warm-up. They did not just want me controlled anymore. To get that money, they needed me destroyed. The ghost in the mansion was about to become the target of a hunt, and I was the only one who knew that the prey had teeth. The wind in Chicago does not just blow, It hunts. It seeks out every gap in your clothing, every exposed inch of skin, and it bites down with a malice that feels personal. But as I stood in the foyer of the only home I had ever known, the cold waiting outside felt less terrifying than the cold radiating from the man standing in front of me. My father, Robert Rodriguez, could not look me in the eye. He was staring at a spot on the carpet, somewhere near his expensive Italian loafers. His hands clasped behind his back, as if he were inspecting a factory floor, rather than disowning his son. The fireplace was crackling in the living room, casting long, dancing shadows against the mahogany walls, but there was no warmth for me here. "You have two choices, Joshua," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. It was a rehearsed line. I could hear Brenda's cadence in his words. "Dr. Holloway has arranged a bed for you at the Sunnydale Center. They have facilities for people with your difficulties. You can sign the voluntary commitment papers tonight, and we will drive you there." He paused, finally, raising his eyes to meet mine. There was no love in them, only a deep, exhausted resignation. "Or," he continued, "you can leave. Right now. If you walk out that door without signing, you are no longer my responsibility. I will not have a violent, unstable man in the same house as my wife." Violent. The word hung in the air, absurd and heavy. I had never thrown a punch in my life. The incident with Lucas had been a setup, a piece of theater, orchestrated to bring us to this exact moment. But defending myself was useless. My father did not want the truth. He wanted a solution. He wanted the problem gone. I looked at the commitment papers on the console table. Sunnydale was not a hospital. It was a warehouse for the inconvenient wealthy. If I went there, the drugs would start immediately. The chemical lobotomy Brenda had always dreamed of would finally be complete. I would be drooling in a corner while they spent my grandfather's $3.6 million. I made my choice in a heartbeat. I did not say a word. I turned my back on him. I saw his shoulders slump in my peripheral vision, perhaps in relief, perhaps in shame. I walked to the coat rack, but my heavy wool coat was gone. Brenda must have removed it. My wallet, which I usually left on the side table, was also missing. I had the clothes on my back, a thin gray hoodie, a pair of worn jeans, and my sneakers. And I had my backpack. Inside was my laptop and, more importantly, the external hard drive, encased in a shockproof shell. That drive contained the encrypted backup of the company's corrupt financial records. It was the only leverage I had, the only proof that I was not the crazy one. I opened the heavy oak front door. The winter air hit me like a physical blow, sucking the heat from my lungs instantly. "Joshua," my father called out one last time. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, a foolish spark of hope igniting in my chest. "Do not come back until you are ready to get help." The spark died. I stepped out and closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home behind me was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of my life cleaving into two parts before and after. It was 11 o'clock at night. The temperature was 14 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. The gated community was silent, the streetlights casting eerie pools of yellow light on the snow-dusted pavement. I started walking. I had to keep moving. If I stopped, the panic would set in, and if the panic set in, I would freeze. My first thought was money. I had a debit card in the back pocket of my jeans, a backup card I kept for emergencies. I walked 3 miles to the nearest gas station, a neon beacon in the desolate suburban darkness. My hands were already numb, my fingers stiff and clumsy as I pulled the card out. I slid it into the ATM. I punched in my PIN. I waited, shivering under the fluorescent lights. Access denied. Card captured. Please contact your financial institution. The machine whirred and swallowed my card. I stared at the screen, blinking against the sting of the wind. Brenda. She had moved faster than I anticipated. She must have flagged my accounts as compromised or had them frozen under a power of attorney I never signed. I checked my phone. No signal. Emergency calls only flashed in the upper corner. They had cut the service plan. I was ghosted. In the span of an hour, I had ceased to exist as a functional member of society. I had no money, no communication, no transport, and no identification. I had to get to the city. I had contacts there. Old freelance clients who knew me as J-Rod, the miracle worker, who fixed their code at 3 in the morning. Someone would help me. Someone would lend me a couch or at least a few dollars for food. I began the long trek toward the train station. I jumped the turnstile, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified of the security guards. I huddled in the corner of the last car on the Blue Line, surrounded by the late-night crowd. Exhausted shift workers, drunks, and other lost souls. No one looked at me. In Chicago, avoiding eye contact is a survival skill. I got off at Jackson. The city wind was different here. It was channeled through the canyons of skyscrapers, accelerating into icy knives that slashed through my hoodie. I wrapped my arms around myself, clutching my backpack to my chest. It was my baby, my shield. I walked toward the office of a startup I had helped launch 6 months ago. They owed me a favor. I had built their entire payment gateway. The CEO, a guy named Mike, had once told me I was a genius. "Anytime you need anything, J-Rod, you call me," he had said over a Zoom call. I reached the building at 1 in the morning. The lobby was warm, bathed in golden light. I pushed through the revolving doors, the heat hitting me like a blessing. "Hey, you stop right there!" The security guard stepped out from behind the desk. He was a large man, his hand resting on his belt. He looked me up and down. I saw myself through his eyes, a shivering, pale figure in dirty jeans and a cheap hoodie hair, wild from the wind, red-rimmed eyes darting nervously. I did not look like a genius software architect. I looked like a junkie looking for a place to crash. "I need to see Mike," I stammered, my social anxiety flaring up under his hostile gaze. "Mike Henderson, I worked here. I am a consultant." The guard laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Mike Henderson. "At 1 a.m., get out of here, kid, before I call the cops." "Please," I whispered. "Just let me sit in the lobby, just for an hour." "Out." He pointed his baton at the door. "Now." I was pushed back out into the cold. The rejection stung more than the wind. I had built the security system that just denied me entry. The irony was a bitter pill that I could not swallow. I kept walking. I did not know where to go. The streets of downtown Chicago at 2 a.m. are a different world. The shadows have teeth. I turned down a narrow street near Wabash, trying to find shelter from the wind behind a dumpster. That was my mistake. I heard the footsteps behind me too late. "Nice bag," a voice said. I spun around. 3 figures emerged from the gloom. They were young, their faces obscured by scarves, but their intent was clear. "Give it here," the leader said, stepping closer. He had something metallic in his hand. "No," I said, my voice cracking. I clutched the backpack tighter. The hard drive, the evidence. My life. "Take anything else." The leader looked down. "Nice kicks, Jordan 1s." They were the only valuable thing I had left. My sneakers. A gift from my grandfather 2 years ago. "The shoes," the leader commanded. "And the bag." "You can have the shoes," I said, terror, giving me a strange, desperate clarity. "But not the bag, please." I kicked them off. I stood in my socks on the freezing pavement, the ice instantly seeping through the fabric, biting into my soles. The leader laughed, picked up the shoes, and looked at the bag again. He stepped forward. I curled into a ball around my backpack, bracing for the beating. "It is just books," I screamed, a lie born of panic. "Just worthless books." Maybe they believed me. Maybe they just did not want to deal with a screaming crazy person. Or maybe the sirens wailing in the distance spooked them. They took the shoes and ran, leaving me shivering in the alley. I stood up. I could not feel my feet. I looked down at my socks. They were already wet and dark. I had to keep moving. If I stopped now with no shoes, I would lose my toes. I would lose my feet. I walked. Every step was agony. It felt like walking on broken glass. The cold was no longer on my skin. It was inside me, turning my blood to slush. I hallucinated warmth. I thought I saw a fire in the distance, but it was just the reflection of a streetlight in a puddle. I found myself near Millennium Park. The giant, silver sculpture Cloudgate loomed in the darkness, reflecting the distorted city lights. It looked like a drop of mercury frozen in time. I stumbled toward it. My legs were heavy, like they were filled with lead. I collapsed on a bench facing the sculpture. I knew I should not sit. I knew the rule. You sit, you die. But I was so tired. A heaviness settled over me, a strange, seductive comfort. The pain in my feet began to fade, replaced by a tingling numbness. My shivering slowed down. Just for a minute, I whispered to the empty air. Just a minute. My eyelids drooped. The world began to gray out at the edges. In the silence of my fading consciousness, a voice cut through the static. It was not Brenda's shrill tone or my father's disappointed sigh. It was a gravelly, warm voice. Use your head, Joshua. I was 10 years old again, sitting in my grandfather's study. He was teaching me chess. They are bigger than you. They are louder than you. But you see the board, Joshua. You see the moves they do not even know exist. Your intellect is a weapon. Do not let them take it from you. Do not let them checkmate you just because you are afraid to move. Grandpa, I mumbled, my head lolling back against the freezing metal of the bench. Get up, Josh. Calculate the odds. Survival probability is dropping. Move. I tried to lift my hand, but it would not obey. The hard drive was pressed against my chest, a cold brick. I was going to die here. I was going to die, and Brenda would win. She would cry at my funeral and say I had run away and succumbed to my illness. She would spend every dime of the $3.6 million on vacations and jewelry. Rage. A tiny hot ember of rage flared in my gut. It was not enough to warm me, but it was enough to keep my heart beating. Then I felt something wet on my cheek. It was warm, rough. A rhythmic huffing sound filled my ear. I forced my eyes open. A nose, a black, wet nose, was inches from my face. A dog. A stout, ugly, beautiful bulldog with an underbite was sniffing me, licking the snowflakes off my skin. Winston, get away from there. The voice was sharp, authoritative, cracking, like a whip through the winter air. It sounded like a voice that was used to being obeyed. I tried to focus. A figure was standing over me. A woman. She was small, bundled in a thick wool coat that looked 3 sizes too big, wearing a hat that covered everything but her eyes. She held a leash in one hand and a cane in the other. She pulled the dog back, but she did not walk away. She leaned in, her eyes narrowing behind thick glasses. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at me with scrutiny, like I was a piece of evidence she was analyzing. You are not drunk, she stated. It was not a question. And you do not smell like you have been on the streets long enough to be this stupid. She tapped my sock-clad foot with the tip of her cane. I flinched, a jolt of pain shooting up my leg. No shoes, she noted. Hypothermia setting in, pupils dilated. She looked around the empty park, then back at me. Well, she demanded, her voice cutting through the fog in my brain. Are you planning to die on my bench, young man? Because I come here every morning at 4 a.m. for peace and quiet, and a corpse would be incredibly inconvenient. I tried to speak, but my jaw was frozen. Help, I managed to croak. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she sighed, a sound of immense irritation. Winston, she said to the dog, it looks like we are bringing home a stray. She reached out a gloved hand. It was small, but when she grabbed my arm, her grip was like iron. Get up, she commanded. If you can stand, you can live. If you stay down, you are done. Up. With the last reserve of energy I possessed, fueled by the memory of my grandfather, and the terrifying authority of this strange woman, I forced my body to move. I stood up, swaying like a tree in a storm. She didn't let go. She propped me up, her small frame surprisingly sturdy. "Walk," she said, and for the first time that night, I walked away from the cold and towards something else. I did not know who she was. I did not know that the hand holding me up had once signed death warrants and shaken the foundations of the state legal system. I just knew that she was the only person in the world who had stopped. I took a step, then another. The snow continued to fall, burying my footprints, as soon as I made them, erasing the path behind me. There was no going back now. I woke up to the smell of old paper and tomato soup. It was a scent that belonged to a different century, a mixture of leather bindings, dust floor wax, and something sharp like wood smoke. I blinked my eyelids, feeling like sandpaper. I was not on a park bench. I was not freezing. I was lying on a velvet sofa that felt soft enough to swallow me whole. A heavy wool blanket was tucked around me with military precision, so tight I could barely move my arms. Panic spiked in my chest, a reflex instant and chemical. I tried to sit up, but my body screamed in protest. Every muscle felt bruised, and my feet throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache. I looked down. My feet were bandaged, thick white gauze wrapped professionally around my frostbitten toes. "Stay down," a voice came from the corner of the room. "Unless you want to bleed on my Persian rug. It is an antique, and I value it more than I value most people." I turned my head. The room was a library or a living room that had surrendered to an invasion of literature. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined every wall, packed with heavy, leather-bound volumes. Illinois compiled statutes, Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Case Law, 1950 to 1990. It was a fortress of knowledge. Sitting in a high-backed wing chair by the fireplace was the woman from the park. She was not wearing her oversized coat now. She wore a sensible gray cardigan and reading glasses that magnified her sharp, intelligent eyes. She was reading a newspaper, and the bulldog Winston was snoring loudly at her feet. She folded the paper and looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You slept for 14 hours. I was beginning to wonder if I needed to call the coroner." "Where?" My voice was a croak. I cleared my throat. "Where am I?" "My house," she said simply. She stood up, leaning on her cane, and walked over to a small table. She poured steaming red liquid from a tureen into a bowl. "Drink this. It is tomato bisque. Nothing fancy. My husband, God rest his soul, used to say it could cure pneumonia. He was usually wrong about medical things, but he was right about the soup." She placed the bowl on the coffee table next to me, along with a stack of folded clothes. "Eat," she commanded. "Then shower. Those clothes belong to Arthur. He was about your height, though perhaps a bit broader in the shoulders. You look like a gust of wind could knock you over." I stared at the soup. My stomach roared, a painful reminder of how long it had been since I had eaten. I sat up, wincing as the blood rushed to my feet, and reached for the spoon. My hands were shaking, not from cold this time, but from weakness. I ate quickly, too quickly, burning my tongue, but I did not care. The warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the lingering chill of the Chicago winter. The woman watched me. She did not ask my name. She did not ask why I was homeless. She did not ask about the bruises on my soul. She just watched her gaze, analytical, dissecting me without saying a word. When I finished, I looked at the clothes. A white, button-down shirt, soft flannel trousers, and a cardigan. They looked clean and cared for. "Thank you," I whispered. "I should go. I cannot pay you. And I do not want to be a burden." "A burden?" She let out a short, dry laugh. "You are not a burden, boy. You are a curiosity. And I do not do charity. I expect you to wash that bowl before you leave." She turned and walked toward a heavy oak desk in the corner of the room where a large computer monitor was glowing. She sat down and sighed, tapping the keyboard with frustration. "Blast this thing," she muttered. "Technology is the one thing I never managed to overrule." I stood up, testing my legs. They held. I grabbed the clothes and headed toward the bathroom she pointed out. As I washed the grime of the streets off my skin, I thought about running. I should climb out the bathroom window. Brenda would be looking for me. If she found me here, she would hurt this woman. She would destroy this sanctuary just to get to me. I was toxic. Everyone I touched got burned. I dressed in Arthur's clothes. They smelled of cedar and faint tobacco. I felt like an imposter wearing the skin of a man who had clearly been loved and respected. I folded my own dirty clothes and placed them in a plastic bag. I would leave. It was the only safe option. I walked back into the living room to say goodbye. The woman was still at her desk, but her posture had changed. She was tense, leaning forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the desk. A harsh, rhythmic beeping sound was coming from the computer speakers. "What is happening?" she demanded, more to the machine than to me. "Why is it flashing red?" I looked at the screen from across the room. My breath hitched. The monitor was a sea of crimson. A dialog box was pulsing in the center of the screen. Security alert. Unauthorized access attempt. Firewall critical. Encryption protocol initiated. It was not a glitch. It was a brute force attack. Someone was hammering her IP address, trying to crack her local network and siphon data. "Turn it off," she said, reaching for the power cord. "No." The word left my mouth before I could stop it. I lunged forward, ignoring the pain in my feet. "Do not cut the power." If they are already in the tunnel, a hard shutdown will corrupt the drive. You will lose everything. She looked at me, surprised by the sudden authority in my voice. "Then, what do I do?" "Move," I said. I did not ask for permission. I slid into the chair as she stepped back. I put my hands on the keyboard. The keys were mechanical, loud and tactile, familiar. The panic that usually paralyzed me in social situations vanished. This was not a conversation. This was not a dinner party with judging eyes. This was code. This was binary. This was a battlefield I understood. I opened the command terminal. The attacker was fast, using a shifting IP algorithm to mask their location. They were bypassing the standard consumer-grade firewall like it was tissue paper. "Okay," I thought. "You want to play? Let us play." My fingers flew. I did not have to think. The commands flowed from my brain to my fingertips in a stream of consciousness. I bypassed the graphical interface, diving straight into the kernel. Identify port entry. Port 8080 is compromised. Reroute traffic. I typed a sequence of commands to isolate the incoming data packets. Create a honeypot. I quickly coded a dummy directory, a fake folder labeled Financial Records, and filled it with a logic bomb, a script that would crash the attacker's terminal the moment they tried to download it. Redirect, trace, block. "What are you doing?" the woman asked, her voice quiet now. "Someone is trying to mirror your hard drive," I said, my eyes glued to the scrolling lines of white text on the black background. "They are looking for documents, old case files, financials." "Both," she said tightly. "Not anymore," I muttered. I executed the final command. The logic bomb detonated. The red warning screen flickered and vanished, replaced by the calm blue of the desktop background. The beeping stopped. I typed one last line to reinforce the firewall with a custom encryption key I had developed when I was 15. System secure. I sat back, exhaling a breath I did not know I had been holding. The adrenaline was fading, leaving my hands trembling again. I looked at the clock on the wall. 3 minutes. It had taken me 3 minutes to repel a professional-grade cyber attack. I spun the chair around. The woman was staring at me. Her expression had shifted from curiosity to something else, something like awe or perhaps recognition. You are not a junkie, she said, and you are certainly not a simple vagrant. She walked over and looked at the screen, then back at me. My IT consultant told me this system was impenetrable. He charged me $5,000 to set it up. You tore through it and rebuilt it in the time it takes to boil an egg. She leaned against the desk, crossing her arms. Who are you? The silence stretched between us. The fire crackled in the grate. I looked at this woman who had saved me from the snow, and I realized I could not lie to her. She had seen my mind at work. She knew. My name is Joshua, I said, my voice quiet. Joshua Rodriguez. Her eyebrows shot up. Rodriguez as in Thorne and Rodriguez Holdings. I nodded. Yes. But I am not part of it anymore. My family thinks I am mentally incompetent. They say, I cannot live alone. They threw me out. I looked down at my hands. They are right about the anxiety. I cannot talk to people, I cannot handle crowds, but I gestured to the computer. I can do this. She studied me for a long time. The clock ticked loudly in the room. Then she walked over to one of the bookshelves. She pulled out a thick, leather-bound book and threw it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. Do you know who I am, Joshua Rodriguez? She asked. I shook my head. My name is Evelyn Vance, she said. For 30 years I sat on the bench of the Illinois Supreme Court. I have sent corrupt senators to prison. I have dismantled organized crime syndicates. I have rewritten the laws on corporate fraud. She tapped the book. They used to call me the steel gavel, because when I struck the sound was the last thing a criminal ever heard. My eyes widened. Evelyn Vance. I had read about her. My grandfather had admired her. She was a legend, a jurist who was known for her terrifying intellect and her absolute refusal to compromise on the truth. She had retired 10 years ago and vanished from the public eye. I have enemies, Joshua, she continued. Powerful ones. That attack just now. That was likely a greeting card from a cartel I helped dismantle in the 90s. They want the names of my informants. They want my private journals. She moved closer, her eyes locking onto mine. You have a gift, she said. You have a mind that sees patterns others miss. And you are being hunted by your own family. I am an old woman, with too many secrets and a computer system I do not understand. She extended her hand. It was small, wrinkled but steady as a rock. I propose a trade, she said. You stay here. You sleep in the guest room, not on the couch. You secure my data. You build me a fortress that no hacker on Earth can breach. You use that brilliant mind of yours to help me finish some old business. And in return, I asked, daring to look her in the eye. In return, Evelyn Vance said, a smile touching her lips for the first time, a smile that was not warm, but sharp and dangerous. I will teach you how to fight, not with code, but with the law. If your family wants to play games with guardianship and mental competency, fine. I will teach you the rules of their game. And then, Joshua, we will make them wish they had never learned your name. I looked at her hand. Then I looked at the computer screen, where my code was still protecting her secrets. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like a broken variable. I felt like a solution. I reached out and took her hand. Deal, I said. 3 years is a lifetime when you are rebuilding a human being from scratch. The first month in Evelyn's house was a blur of withdrawal, not from drugs, but from the toxic conditioning of my family. I flinched when doors slammed. I apologized for existing. I hid in the library, terrified that if I made a sound, this miracle would end, and I would be back on the street. But Evelyn Vance did not tolerate fear. She treated it like a legal loophole, something to be identified, analyzed, and closed. Stand up straight, Joshua, she would bark, tapping my spine with her cane as I slouched over my laptop. You are 6 feet tall. Stop trying to be 3 feet tall. The world will not make space for you. You have to take it. Our days fell into a rigorous rhythm. Mornings were for the body. Evelyn hired a personal trainer, a retired Marine named Marcus, who did not care about my anxiety. He only cared about results. At first, I could barely do 10 push-ups. My arms were sticks, my stamina non-existent. But pain is a great focuser. It pulls you out of your head and into your muscles. Day by day, the soft, trembling boy who had been pushed down the stairs by his brother began to disappear. In his place, a man started to emerge. My shoulders broadened. My grip strength increased. I cut my hair short, revealing a face that I had hidden behind shaggy bangs for decades. I stopped looking like a victim. Afternoons were for the mind. This was where the real transformation happened. We sat in the library surrounded by stacks of case files. Evelyn taught me the law, but not like a professor. She taught me like a predator teaching her cub to hunt. "The law is not about Justice Joshua," she said one rainy Tuesday, pouring tea into fine china cups. "It is about narrative. It is about who tells the better story. Your family told a story about a helpless, mentally incompetent invalid. We are going to tell a different story." She taught me to read people. We would watch trials on C-SPAN with the sound off. "Look at his hands," she would say, pointing to a witness. "He is rubbing his thumb against his palm. He is lying. He is reciting a script. Now look at the judge. She is leaning back. She is bored. You have lost her. How do you get her back?" She forced me to make eye contact. At first, I could only hold her gaze for 2 seconds, before looking away, my heart racing. "Again," she would command. "Look at me. I am not going to bite you. I am just a person. Do not let me intimidate you. Own the space between us. We did it 1,000 times. 2 seconds became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became a conversation. I learned to project my voice, to drop it an octave, to speak with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who knows exactly what he is worth. I learned that silence is a power move, not a weakness. While Evelyn sharpened my social armor, I sharpened my sword. In the quiet hours of the night, I built Aegis Zero. It started as a small consulting gig for a friend of a friend, a security audit for a mid-sized bank. I found 17 critical vulnerabilities in under 4 hours. They were so impressed, they referred me to a hedge fund. Then a pharmaceutical giant. I worked under the pseudonym Orion. I never met clients in person. Everything was done via encrypted channels. My reputation grew in the dark web and the boardrooms of the Fortune 500. They called me the Ghost Architect. I could fortify a network against state-sponsored hackers or track a stolen cryptocurrency fortune across the blockchain. Money started to pour in. Real money. Not the allowance my father used to dole out, but hundreds of thousands of dollars. I did not spend it. I channeled it through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore trusts in Singapore and Switzerland. To the IRS, Joshua Rodriguez was a ghost with zero income. But in reality, Orion was quietly amassing a fortune that rivaled the GDP of a small island nation. I bought better equipment. I upgraded Evelyn's security to military-grade standards. And then I turned my sights back to the people who had tried to erase me. I hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Sarah, to watch the watchers. Every week she sent me a report on the Rodriguez family. It was a grim satisfaction to watch their slow-motion train wreck. Without my grandfather's steady hand and without me quietly fixing their back-end systems, Thorne and Rodriguez Holdings were in freefall. They had lost 3 major contracts in the last year. Lucas had tried to pivot into tech startups, investing millions in vaporware companies that collapsed within months. He was driving a leased Ferrari he could not afford and snorting his stress away in VIP clubs. Brenda was worse. The gambling debts she had tried to hide were now spiraling out of control. She was borrowing from loan sharks to pay the interest on other loans. She had mortgaged the mansion twice. They were desperate, and desperate people are predictable. "They are bleeding," I told Evelyn one evening as we reviewed the latest dossier. "They need a transfusion." "And you are the blood bank," Evelyn said, studying a photo of Lucas, looking haggard, leaving a casino at 4 a.m. Your 32nd birthday is next month. The trust fund matures. $3.6 million, I said. It is not enough to save the company, but it is enough to keep them afloat for another year. Enough to pay off the sharks. They think you are dead, Evelyn noted, or rotting in a gutter. They have not filed a missing person report because they do not want the police asking questions. No, I corrected her, sliding a document across the desk. They just filed something else. Evelyn picked up the paper. It was a court filing from the King County Family Court, petition for permanent guardianship and conservatorship in absentia. They are claiming that since I have been missing for 3 years and have a documented history of severe mental illness, I should be declared legally incapacitated. I explained, my voice steady. They want the court to grant them control of my assets, specifically the trust, so they can manage it for my eventual return. Evelyn read the document, her lips thinning into a straight line. They are using Dr. Holloway's old evaluations, and they have affidavits here from witnesses, claiming they saw you living on the streets, talking to yourself, unable to recognize family members. Lies, I said. Of course they are lies, Evelyn snapped, tossing the paper down. But in a court of law, a lie that is not challenged becomes the truth. If you do not show up, the judge will grant this. They will get the money, and you will be legally erased. She looked at me. The boy who had arrived shivering in her hallway 3 years ago was gone. In his place sat a man in a bespoke suit with the posture of a CEO and the eyes of a hawk. "Are you ready?" she asked. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the Chicago skyline glittered in the distance. Somewhere in that city, my father was probably drinking scotch, telling himself he did what was best. Brenda was probably planning how to spend my money. Lucas was probably laughing about how easy it was to get rid of the retard. I felt a cold, calm fury. It was not the panicked fear of the past. It was the calculated resolve of a chess master who sees mate in 5 moves. I am not just ready to stop them, I said, turning back to Evelyn. I am ready to end them. Good, Evelyn said, picking up her cane. Because I have been retired for 10 years and I am bored. Let us go to court. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. We did not just prepare a defense. We prepared an ambush. I used Aegis Zero's resources to dig deeper than any private investigator could. I hacked into the encrypted messaging apps Brenda used to talk to her bookie. I retrieved the deleted surveillance footage from the night Lucas fell down the stairs, footage I had backed up on the drive I took with me that night. I traced the wire transfers from the company accounts to Dr. Holloway's offshore shell corporation. I built a timeline of corruption so detailed it could put them all in federal prison for 20 years. But the masterstroke was the timing. The hearing was set for 9 a.m. on my birthday. It was poetic. They wanted to celebrate my birthday by stealing my inheritance. I would celebrate it by giving them a gift they would never forget. On the eve of the trial, I stood in front of the mirror in the guest room. I adjusted my tie. The man staring back at me was a stranger to the Rodriguez family. He was strong. He was wealthy. He was dangerous. I picked up my phone. I dialed a number I had not called in 3 years. "Hello," Lucas's voice answered, sounding groggy and irritable. "Happy birthday to me, Lucas," I said. There was a silence on the other end. A long, stunned silence. "Joshua," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Where are you?" "I am around," I said, my tone light and conversational. "I heard you are throwing a party for me at the courthouse tomorrow. I would hate to miss it." "You are alive." Panic was rising in his voice. "Listen, you freak, if you think you can just waltz back in here." "I do not think, Lucas." I cut him off, my voice dropping to that low, commanding register Evelyn had taught me. "I know. Tell Brenda to wear something nice. Black would be appropriate." I hung up before he could respond. The game was on. The summons arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a process server who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. It was a heavy envelope, thick with legal jargon, and the weight of my family's greed. The King County Family Court was not asking for my presence. They were demanding it. The header was clear. If I did not appear to contest the petition for permanent guardianship, the court would rule in absentia. That meant my father and Brenda would automatically win. They would gain legal control over my person, my medical decisions, and most importantly, the $3.6 million trust fund that was set to unlock the moment the clock struck midnight on my 32nd birthday. I held the document in my hands, feeling the texture of the paper. 3 years ago, this piece of paper would have sent me into a spiral of panic attacks. I would have hyperventilated in the corner, terrified of the confrontation. Now I just felt a cold clinical satisfaction. It was the invitation to the execution I had been planning. "They are forcing your hand," Evelyn said, looking over my shoulder. "They expect you to run. They expect the pressure to break you before you even step inside the courtroom." "They are right about one thing," I said, walking over to the shredder and feeding the envelope's outer shell into its teeth. "I am going to the courthouse, but I am not going as the defendant. I am going as the executioner. But to spring a trap, the prey must believe they are safe." Brenda and Lucas needed to believe that nothing had changed. They needed to believe that the Joshua they were about to face was the same stuttering, frightened boy they had thrown into the snow. I sat down at my terminal and opened a secure sandbox environment. I needed to send an email to the family attorney, Mr. Sterling, but I could not send it from my encrypted Aegis Zero account. It had to look authentic. It had to look pathetic. I reactivated an old dormant email address, josh.rod88@gmail.com. I opened the composition window. I turned off the spell check. I typed slowly, forcing myself to abandon the grammar and precision I had honed over the last 3 years. "Subject court date, dear Mr. Sterling. I got the papers. Please tell Dad I am coming. I don't want trouble, I just want to talk to him. Please don't put me in the hospital. I will be there at 9. Josh." I hit send. It was a masterpiece of submission. Lowercase letters, run-on sentences, the plea for mercy. It painted a picture of a broken man who was coming to surrender, not to fight. Within an hour, my surveillance network picked up the reaction. Through the audio bugs I had planted in the Rodriguez mansion's living room 2 months prior, the sound of celebration came through crystal clear. "He is coming!" Brenda's voice trilled shrill with excitement. "Did you see the email? He is begging Robert. Please do not put me in the hospital. He is terrified." "He sounds unstable," my father's voice replied, though he sounded more relieved than concerned. "At least we do not have to hunt him down. We can get this over with and get him into a facility." "And the money?" Lucas asked. I could hear the clink of glass. "Once he is declared incompetent, the trust transfers to Dad, right? And then we can finally cover the margin call on the tech investment." "The money is safe," Brenda assured him. "Mr. Sterling says it is a slam dunk. The judge will take one look at him, dirty, shaking, mumbling, and sign the papers before lunch." They opened a bottle of Dom Perignon. I sat in Evelyn's library, listening to the pop of the cork through my high-fidelity headphones. I took a sip of my sparkling water. "Drink up," I thought. "Enjoy it. It is the last expensive bottle you will ever afford." But they were not leaving anything to chance. My investigation revealed they had brought in a heavy hitter. Dr. Holloway, the psychiatrist who had drugged me for years, was back on the payroll. I pulled up Holloway's recent financials on the main screen. He had received a consult fee of $50,000 from a shell company linked to Brenda just 3 days ago. In exchange for that bribe, he was preparing a new psychiatric evaluation. I accessed his cloud drive, secure to the average user, but a joke to me, and found the draft of his testimony. It was a work of fiction. He was diagnosing me with paranoid schizophrenia, claiming I had a history of violent hallucinations and a complete detachment from reality. He stated in writing that leaving me unsupervised was a danger to the public. He has never examined you as an adult, Evelyn said, reading the stolen document over my shoulder. This is perjury. It is medical malpractice. It is beautiful. Beautiful, I asked. Because he has put it in writing, she explained, tapping the screen with her cane. If he testifies to this and we can prove he has not seen you in 3 years, he loses his license. He goes to jail. He is handing us his career on a silver platter. But only if I can keep it together, I said. Evelyn's face hardened. She turned my chair around so I had to look at her. That is the variable, Joshua. The law is on our side. The evidence is on our side. But the courtroom is theater. Brenda and Lucas know exactly which buttons to push. They know your triggers. They will try to humiliate you. They will whisper things about your mother. They will laugh at you. They want you to scream. They want you to cry. If you show even a crack of emotion, the judge might think Holloway is right. I am not that person anymore, I said, though a small knot of tension tightened in my stomach. Prove it, Evelyn challenged. When Lucas calls you, and he will call you, do not fight back. Let him spew his poison. Take it, absorb it, and record it. I spent the rest of the day assembling the file. This was not a defense strategy. It was a warhead. I organized the documents into a binder, the financial records showing the embezzlement, the video of Lucas faking his fall, the emails between Brenda and her bookie, the wire transfer to Holloway. I labeled the binder simply, The Truth. That night, the eve of the hearing, the sky over Chicago was a bruised purple. I needed to get out of the house. I needed to touch the ground where it all began. I drove my car, a discreet black sedan registered to a corporation that did not exist, to the cemetery on the outskirts of the city. The gates were closed, but I knew the code. I parked and walked through the rows of silent stones until I found the simple granite marker under the oak tree. Arthur Rodriguez, beloved father and grandfather. The wind was biting, whipping the tail of my coat around my legs, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a profound sense of calm. I am going back tomorrow, Grandpa, I said to the stone. They think they are going to bury me. They think I am the same scared kid who could not look people in the eye. I knelt down and brushed a dead leaf off the engraving. You told me my mind was a weapon, I whispered. I sharpened it. I'm going to take back what they stole, not just the money. I'm going to take back my name. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I stood up and checked the screen. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I had reactivated my old SIM card just for this moment. I took a deep breath. I swiped the screen to answer and tapped the icon to begin recording. Hello, I said, injecting a tremor into my voice. Hey, little brother. Lucas. His voice was thick, slurring slightly. He was drunk. Perfect. Lucas, I asked, why are you calling? Just wanted to wish you luck for tomorrow. He laughed, a cruel, wet sound. We have a nice suit picked out for you. A straitjacket. Designer label, of course. Please, I said. I do not want to go to the hospital. I am fine. I have a job. A job? Lucas cackled. Begging for change is not a job, Josh. You are a mess. You have always been a mess. Mom hated you. You know my mom hates you. Dad hates you. Even your own mother probably died just to get away from you. The rage flared in my chest, white-hot and violent. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to tell him that I owned the bank that held his mortgage. I wanted to tell him that his life was currently dangling by a thread that I held in my hand. But I looked down at my grandfather's grave. Discipline, I heard Evelyn's voice. The narrative. I forced the rage down. I let the silence stretch. Why are you doing this, Lucas? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because you do not deserve it, he shouted, his mood swinging instantly from mockery to anger. $3.6 million for a retard. who can't even look a waiter in the eye. It is wasted on you. It belongs to the family. It belongs to me. You are nothing, Josh. You are just a glitch in the system that we have to delete." "I see," I said. "So it is just about the money." "It is always about the money," Lucas spat. "Bring your toothbrush tomorrow, freak. You are not coming home." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I stopped the recording. "Got you," I said to the wind. He had just admitted to predatory intent. He had admitted that the guardianship was financially motivated. Combined with the other evidence, this recording was the final nail in the coffin. I drove back to Evelyn's house in silence. The city lights blurred past me streaks of gold and red. I felt a strange detachment, like an astronaut sitting on top of a rocket waiting for the countdown. When I walked into the library, Evelyn was still up. She was polishing her reading glasses, a cup of tea steaming on the desk. "Did he call?" she asked without looking up. "Yes," I said. "Did you get it? Every word. Good." She put her glasses on and looked at me. "Go to sleep, Joshua. Tomorrow you have a performance to give." I went to my room, but I did not sleep. I laid out my suit for the next morning. It was not the cheap, ill-fitting polyester suit my father used to force me to wear. It was a charcoal gray bespoke suit from Savile Row, tailored to the millimeter to fit my new frame. A crisp white shirt, a silk tie in deep maroon, and the shoes, Italian leather polished to a mirror shine. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The face looking back was hard, angular, and composed. The eyes were not darting around in fear. They were steady. I thought about the pills I used to spit out. I thought about the cold floor of the mansion. I thought about the snow on the night I was exiled. Tomorrow at 9 in the morning, Joshua Rodriguez the invalid, the mistake, the burden would die. And in his place, something else would walk into that courtroom. The trap was set, the bait was taken. And the hunters had no idea that they were standing directly under the falling blade. The courtroom smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and expensive lies. Room 304 of the King County Family Court was a theater, and the curtains had just risen on the final act of my destruction. I stood outside the heavy double doors, checking the time on my wristwatch. It was 8:59 in the morning. Precision is the language of control, and today I intended to control everything. I adjusted my cuffs. The charcoal gray suit felt like armor. The fabric was light, but structured, wrapping around the muscle I had built over 3 years of grueling workouts. I touched the bridge of my gold-rimmed glasses. They were not prescription. My vision was perfect, but they added a layer of intellectual distance, a barrier between the world and my eyes. I took a deep breath. I did not hyperventilate. I did not shake. I visualized the chessboard. I saw the pieces arranged on the other side of the door. The Queen Brenda, the Knight Lucas, the pawn my father, and the bishop Dr. Holloway. They were waiting for a victim. I pushed the doors open. The silence that greeted me was not the respectful silence of a court in session. It was the stunned silence of an audience watching a plot twist they did not understand. My family was sitting at the petitioner's table on the left. They had dressed for a funeral. Brenda was wearing a modest black dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, accessorized with a single strand of pearls and a lace handkerchief she was already pressing to her dry eyes. She was playing the role of the grieving mother, the saintly woman burdened by a defective stepson. Lucas sat next to her. He was wearing a navy blue suit that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a testament to the weight he had gained from stress, eating, and drinking over the last few years. He looked restless, tapping his pen against the table, his eyes bloodshot despite the Vicine he must have used in the parking lot. My father, Robert, sat with his head in his hands, looking like a man who just wanted the earth to open up and swallow him. They were expecting a ghost. They were expecting a shivering, dirty, mumbling creature in a stained hoodie. They were expecting the Joshua they had thrown away. Instead, I walked down the center aisle. My stride was long and measured. The click of my Italian leather shoes on the hardwood floor echoed rhythmically. Click, click, click. The sound of impending doom, though they did not know it yet. I felt their eyes land on me. I saw the physical jolt that went through Brenda's body. She lowered her handkerchief, her mouth opening slightly, in a breach of her carefully constructed facade. Lucas froze his pen, hovering in midair. My father looked up, his eyes widening in confusion. I did not look at them. Evelyn had taught me well. You do not acknowledge the hecklers, she had said. You acknowledge the judge. I walked to the respondent's table on the right side of the room. It was empty. I placed my leather briefcase on the table, a sleek, handmade piece that cost $4,000, and sat down. I crossed my legs. I folded my hands on the table. I looked straight ahead at the bench. From the corner of my ear, I heard Lucas whisper a frantic hiss that carried across the quiet room. "It is a costume," he muttered to Brenda. "Look at him. He is still twitching. It is just a shell. Inside he is still the same retard." "Quiet," Brenda hissed back, recovering her composure. "It does not matter what he wears. The medical records speak for themselves." The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise." Judge Moore entered. He was a stern man with a face carved from granite and a reputation for hating time-wasters. He sat down, adjusted his robe, and looked over his spectacles at the room. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, a flicker of curiosity, before he turned his attention to the petitioners. "We are here for the matter of the guardianship of Joshua Rodriguez," Judge Moore said, his voice dry. "Petitioners allege that the respondent is incapacitated and unable to manage his financial and personal affairs. Mr. Sterling, you may proceed." Mr. Sterling, the family's lawyer, stood up. He was a man who smiled with too many teeth. He buttoned his jacket, a gesture of professional aggression, and walked toward the center of the room. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. "This is a tragedy, a true family tragedy. We are not here out of malice. We are here out of love. The Rodriguez family has spent decades caring for Joshua. He is a young man with a brilliant mind for numbers, yes, but a mind that is tragically broken by severe paranoid schizophrenia and crippling social anxiety." He walked back to his table and picked up a stack of documents. "For the last 3 years, Joshua has been missing." Sterling continued waving the papers. "Living on the streets, refusing contact. Here are police reports from Chicago PD regarding a John Doe matching Joshua's description, involved in alleyway brawls." I raised an eyebrow. Brawls? I had never thrown a punch in my life. They were fabricating criminal records now. "We have statements from shelter volunteers," Sterling went on, building his fiction brick by brick, claiming that the respondent was seen talking to invisible people, hoarding trash, and stealing food from other homeless individuals. "He is a danger to himself, Your Honor. If he is given access to the substantial trust fund, in question $3.6 million, he will not only squander it, he will likely use it to harm himself. He will be dead in a month." Sterling paused for effect, looking at Brenda. She let out a soft, perfectly timed sob. "My clients simply want to bring him home." Sterling finished, his voice trembling with emotion. "They want to get him the help he needs. They are asking for full guardianship so they can place him in a secure facility where he will be safe." "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," the judge said. He looked bored. He had heard this story 1,000 times. "Call your first witness." "We call Dr. Arthur Holloway," Sterling announced. The doors opened, and Dr. Holloway walked in. He looked exactly as I remembered him, polished, arrogant, and smelling of antiseptic. He was wearing a suit that was too expensive for a doctor on a standard salary, but perfectly affordable for a man who took bribes from corrupt families. He took the oath. He sat in the witness stand. He adjusted the microphone. "Dr. Holloway," Sterling asked, "you have treated Joshua Rodriguez for how long?" Over 10 years, Holloway lied smoothly. And in your professional medical opinion, does Joshua possess the capacity to live independently? Holloway shook his head, a gesture of profound professional regret. Absolutely not. Joshua suffers from a degenerative form of schizophrenia. His reality testing is non-existent. Without heavy sedation and 24-hour supervision, he is prone to violent outbursts and catatonic states. I have reviewed his recent history, and I can say with certainty that his condition has deteriorated. I watched him. I watched the way he smoothed his tie. I watched the slight bead of sweat on his upper lip. He was lying under oath. He was committing perjury in open court. He was claiming to have reviewed a patient he had not seen in 3 years. And regarding his financial competency, Sterling asked. He cannot understand the concept of value, Holloway stated firmly. Giving him $3.6 million would be like giving a loaded gun to a toddler. He needs a conservator. He needs his family. Thank you, doctor, Sterling said. Your witness. He looked at my empty table, smirking. There was no one to cross-examine. Judge Moore looked at me. Mr. Rodriguez, he said, do you have questions for the witness? I remained seated. I did not speak. I simply shook my head once. Let the record show the respondent has declined to cross-examine, the judge said. Sterling called Brenda to the stand. This was the centerpiece of the performance. Brenda walked to the stand as if she were walking to the gallows, a martyr, sacrificing herself for the greater good. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sterling asked gently, tell the court why you are doing this. Because I promised his mother, Brenda said, her voice breaking. On her deathbed, I promised I would take care of him. Joshua is a sweet boy when he is on his medication, but when he is off it, she shuddered. He attacked his brother. He threatened his father. We just want him safe. We do not care about the money. The trust fund can stay locked away for all I care. We just want our boy back. It was a masterclass in manipulation. If I did not know her, I might have believed her. She painted a picture of a loving, beleaguered stepmother dealing with a monster. Lucas was nodding from the table, looking solemn. My father was staring at the floor. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez, Sterling said. The petitioner's rest. The room went quiet. The weight of the accusations hung in the air. According to the record, I was a violent schizophrenic addict who needed to be locked up immediately. Judge Moore turned his gaze to me. He leaned forward, his elbows on the bench. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge said, you are here responding to a petition that would strip you of your civil rights. The accusations are serious. You are facing involuntary commitment. He paused, looking at my empty table. I see you are seated alone, Judge Moore continued. Do you have legal representation, or do you wish for the court to appoint a public defender? Before I could answer, Brenda spoke up from the petitioner's table. She did not stand up. She just called out, unable to help herself. He does not have a lawyer, Your Honor, she said, her voice dripping with condescension masked as charity. He does not have any money. He has been living on the street. How could he afford a lawyer? She let out a small, derisive laugh. If the court pleases, we are willing to pay for a public defender for him. We want this to be fair. We will pay the fees. Poor thing probably doesn't even know where he is right now. Lucas snickered. Sterling smiled indulgently. They thought they had won. They thought I was silent because I was catatonic. They thought the suit was just a costume I had stolen. I looked at the judge. Then I looked at Brenda. I locked eyes with her. For the first time in my life, I did not look away. I held her gaze until her smile faltered. I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up. I stood to my full height. I buttoned my suit jacket with a single, fluid motion. I did not slouch. I did not fidget. I stood like a statue carved from obsidian. I took a step away from the table, moving into the open floor. Your Honor, I said. My voice filled the room. It was not the thin, reedy whisper of the boy who used to hide in the attic. It was a baritone rumble projected from the diaphragm, resonant and steady. It was a voice that commanded attention. Brenda flinched as if I had slapped her. Lucas's jaw dropped. I turned my body slightly so I was addressing Brenda directly, though my words were for the record. I do not need your money, Brenda, I said, my diction crisp and perfect. I do not need your pity, and I certainly do not need you to pay for my defense. I turned back to the judge. I saw a flicker of surprise in Judge Moore's eyes. He had been expecting a mumbling incompetent. He was looking at a man who projected more authority than the lawyers in the room. You asked if I have representation, Your Honor, I continued. I do. My attorney is not late. She simply prefers to make an entrance when the stage is properly set. Sterling scoffed, standing up. Your Honor, this is a delay tactic. The respondent is clearly delusional. He has no attorney. Mr. Sterling, the judge warned. Sit down. Thank you, Your Honor, I said. I checked my watch. She should be at the door right now. As if on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A rhythmic sound echoed on the floorboards. Thump, click, thump, click. The sound of a heavy cane hitting the floor, followed by the sharp click of sensible heels. The entire room turned. Evelyn Vance walked in. She was wearing a navy blue suit that looked like it was cut from the same cloth as a judge's robe. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun. She moved slowly, leaning on her cane, but her presence was like a tidal wave. She carried a leather briefcase that was older than I was, battered and scarred from 1,000 legal battles. She did not look at the gallery. She walked straight down the center aisle, her eyes fixed on the bench. A gasp went through the room. It started from the court reporter who stopped typing. Then the bailiff's eyes widened. But the reaction from the petitioner's table was the most satisfying. Sterling's face drained of color. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. He knew who she was. Every lawyer in the state knew who she was. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Impossible, he whispered. Brenda looked confused. Who is that? She asked Lucas. Why is everyone staring? Lucas didn't answer. He was staring at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Judge Moore stood up. He actually stood up. Judges never stand for attorneys. Justice Vance, the judge, said, his voice respectful, almost reverent. We did not know you were returning to practice. Evelyn stopped at my table. She dropped her heavy briefcase onto the wood with a loud thud. She looked at the judge, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Hello, William, she said. You have done well for yourself since you clerked for me in '95. She turned to face the room. She swept her gaze over Sterling, over Holloway, over Brenda and Lucas. It was the look of a wolf assessing a flock of particularly stupid sheep. I apologize for the interruption, Evelyn said, her voice raspy but sharp as a razor. I had to make a stop at the clerk's office to file an appearance and to pick up some certified bank records from the Cayman Islands that I found quite illuminating. She looked at me. Ready, Joshua. Ready, I said. Brenda stood up, her face flushed with anger. Who is this old woman? Objection, she cannot just walk in here. Judge Moore slammed his gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Sit down, Mrs. Rodriguez, the judge roared. You will show respect in my courtroom. You are addressing the former Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court. Brenda collapsed back into her chair, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Justice Vance, Judge Moore said, sitting back down. Am I to understand you are representing the respondent? I am, Evelyn said. And frankly, Your Honor, after listening to the fairy tales Mr. Sterling has been spinning for the last 20 minutes, I suggest you instruct the court reporter to prepare a transcript for the district attorney, because perjury is a felony, and I intend to prove that we have just heard a great deal of it. She opened her briefcase. My client is not incompetent, Evelyn declared. My client is the only person in this room who knows exactly what is going on. And we are about to show you why. I looked at my father. He was pale, staring at Evelyn, then at me. Dad, I said softly, but in the silence of the room, everyone heard it. You said I could not live alone. You were right. I live with the truth. The trap had snapped shut. The hunters were now the prey, and the slaughter was about to begin. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, physical, and suffocating. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of room 304, replaced by a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. My father was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the words, "I live with the truth," hanging between us like a suspended blade. But the real drama was unfolding at the judge's bench. Judge William Moore, a man known for his stone-faced demeanor and absolute adherence to protocol, was no longer sitting. He was standing. He had risen from his leather chair the moment Evelyn Vance crossed the threshold, a breach of courtroom etiquette, so severe it was almost scandalous. Judges do not stand for lawyers. They do not stand for defendants. They stand only for the flag and the jury. But William Moore was standing for the woman who had taught him what the law actually meant. Justice Vance, Judge Moore repeated, his voice losing its judicial boom and softening into something resembling the tone of a stunned student. The court was not aware you were active. The docket listed the respondent as unrepresented. Evelyn walked toward the bench. She moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. Thump, click, thump, click. Her cane was not a crutch. It was a metronome setting the tempo for the destruction of my family. She stopped, right in front of the partition, resting her hands on the polished wood. She looked small in stature compared to the high bench, but her presence filled the room, casting a shadow that swallowed everyone else whole. "I filed my notice of appearance electronically 8 minutes ago, William," she said, her voice dry and crackling like parchment. "I apologize for the theatrical timing. I was detained. It takes longer than one might expect to authenticate wire transfer records from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, especially when the bank manager requires a bit of persuasion." She turned, slightly, dropping the heavy stack of files onto my table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "But to answer your question," she continued, looking at Mr. Sterling, who was currently clutching the edge of his table, as if he were on the deck of a sinking ship. "I am very much active. I find retirement to be incredibly boring. Gardening does not offer the same satisfaction as dismantling a fraudulent case, does it, Mr. Sterling?" Sterling went pale. It was a visceral reaction. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. He knew. Of course he knew. Any lawyer in Illinois who had passed the bar in the last 40 years knew the legend of the steel gavel. Evelyn Vance wasn't just a judge. She was a force of nature. She was the jurist who had presided over the landmark State versus Corcoran case, which redefined corporate liability. She had a conviction rate of 100% as a prosecutor and a zero overturn record as a judge. Facing her was like bringing a plastic knife to a nuclear war. I, Sterling stammered, loosening his tie. "Your Honor, I object. This is highly irregular. We have had no discovery. We have had no notice. Ms. Vance cannot just waltz in here." "Ms. Vance?" Judge Moore's eyebrows shot up. But before the judge could dress him down, Brenda stood up. Her face was a mask of twisted fury. She did not know who Evelyn was. To her, this was just an old woman interrupting her victory lap. She saw her plan crumbling: the money, the control, the humiliation of her stepson, and she reacted with the feral instinct of a cornered animal. "Objection!" Brenda shrieked, her voice piercing the stunned silence. She pointed a manicured finger at Evelyn. "Who does she think she is? This is a family court. She is too old to even be here. She probably wandered in from a nursing home. She has no right to practice here." Lucas grabbed her arm. trying to pull her down. "Mom, shut up," he hissed, his eyes darting from the judge to Evelyn with growing terror. "Mom, stop." "No!" Brenda shook him off. "I will not let this senile hag ruin this judge. I demand you throw her out. She has no standing." The courtroom gasped. Even the court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys, mouth agape. Judge Moore's face turned a deep, dangerous shade of red. He did not bang his gavel. He did not shout. He leaned forward, looming over the bench, his eyes locking onto Brenda with a terrifying intensity. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the judge said, his voice dropping to a low, rumbling growl that was far scarier than any shout. "You will silence yourself immediately." "But she—" Brenda started. "Silence." The word cracked like a whip. Judge Moore pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn, who was watching Brenda with a look of mild amusement, as if she were observing a particularly noisy insect. "You are questioning the standing of this woman," Judge Moore asked, his voice dripping with incredulous rage. "You are claiming she has no right to practice in this court, madam. You are speaking to the Honorable Evelyn Vance. She served on the Supreme Court of this state for 30 years. She did not just practice the law in this room. She wrote it." He picked up a thick blue book from his desk, the Illinois Code of Civil Procedure. He held it up for Brenda to see. "Do you see this book, Mrs. Rodriguez?" the judge asked. "This is the rule book we all play by. Evelyn Vance wrote the commentary on Section 2-1401 regarding relief from judgments. She drafted the amendments on guardianship fraud. Asking if she has the right to practice here is like asking if electricity has the right to be in a light bulb." Brenda froze. The color drained from her face, matching the pallor of her lawyer. She looked at Evelyn, really looked at her for the first time, and saw the steel behind the spectacles. She sank back into her chair, realizing she had just made a fatal error. Evelyn bowed her head slightly to the judge. "Thank you, William. Though I must say the commentary on Section 2-1401 was not my best work. I was rushing to make a dinner reservation." She turned to the gallery, then to the petitioner's table. She walked toward them, her cane tapping a slow, predatory rhythm. She stopped in front of Dr. Holloway. The psychiatrist was sweating profusely now, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. "Dr. Holloway," Evelyn said pleasantly, "I believe you testified that my client requires 24-hour supervision, that he is incapable of managing complex tasks." Holloway swallowed hard. "That is my clinical opinion, yes." "Interesting," Evelyn said. She walked back to my table and picked up a single sheet of paper from the stack she had brought. "Because, according to this affidavit from the Department of Defense, a contractor named Orion, who shares a biometric signature with my client, just secured the cybersecurity grid for the naval base in San Diego, a contract worth $12 million. She dropped the paper on the defense table. And she continued, picking up another document. "According to this bank statement from the Cayman Islands, the one I was late collecting a deposit of $50,000 was made into your personal offshore account, Holloway Consulting Limited, 3 days ago. The source of the funds, a shell company called BR Investments. And the signatory on that account." Evelyn turned and pointed her cane directly at Brenda. "Brenda Rodriguez," the room erupted. "Objection!" Sterling screamed, jumping to his feet, desperate to stop the bleeding. "Hearsay! This is an ambush!" "It is not hearsay," Evelyn replied calmly, her voice cutting through the noise. "It is a certified bank record, obtained via a subpoena I filed 3 weeks ago under a sealed indictment. You see, Mr. Sterling, while you were preparing a character assassination, we were preparing a forensic audit. I watched them. I watched the confident, arrogant family that had tormented me for decades dissolve into panic." Lucas was gripping the table, his knuckles white. Brenda was staring at the table, her mouth moving silently. My father looked like he was having a heart attack. I stood up again. I walked over to stand next to Evelyn. I felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with the money, and everything to do with the truth. "Dad," I said again. He looked up at me. His eyes were wet. "You wanted me to be normal," I said, my voice steady and unforgiving. "You wanted me to fit in. You let them drug me. You let them gaslight me. You let them throw me out into the snow because you were too weak to stand up to her." I pointed at Brenda. "But you were right about one thing. I am not normal. Normal people do not survive what you did to me. Normal people break. I did not break. I compiled." I turned to the judge. "Your Honor," I said, "my lawyer has the receipts. She has the emails. She has the surveillance footage of my brother staging his attack. We are not just here to contest the guardianship. We are here to file a cross-petition." Evelyn smiled. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "We are filing for a dismissal with prejudice," Evelyn announced. "And we are submitting a motion for immediate sanctions against the petitioners and their counsel for filing a frivolous lawsuit conspiracy to commit fraud and perjury." She looked at Sterling, whose career was effectively ending in real time. "And Mr. Sterling," she added, "if I were you, I would stop objecting and start looking for a criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one." The judge looked at the chaotic scene before him. He looked at the sweating doctor, the terrified lawyer, the furious stepmother, and the stoic, powerful young man standing next to the legendary judge. Judge Moore sat back in his chair. He picked up his gavel, but he did not bang it. He just held it, weighing it in his hand. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice deadly quiet, "I suggest you sit down. Justice Vance, please proceed with your evidence. The court is listening intently." I sat back down. I opened my laptop. I typed a single command to bring up the visual presentation on the court's monitors. Project Retribution.exe loaded. I looked at Lucas across the aisle. He met my gaze, and for the first time, he didn't see a victim. He saw the predator I had become. I offered him a small, cold smile. "Happy birthday to me," I mouthed. The real hearing had just begun. The courtroom shifted. It was no longer a place of judgment where I was the accused. It was an operating theater, and Evelyn Vance was the surgeon holding the scalpel. She did not pace. She did not shout. She stood anchored at the defense table, her hand resting lightly on the stack of evidence we had compiled, radiating a terrifying calm that silenced even the air conditioning vents. "Your Honor," Evelyn began, her voice crisp and carrying to the back of the gallery. "The petitioners have spent the last hour painting a portrait of my client. They have used words like incompetent, violent, and unstable. They have relied on the testimony of a doctor who has not treated the patient in 3 years, and the tears of a stepmother who claims to be motivated by love." She paused, looking over her spectacles at Brenda, who was now clutching her pearls so tightly her knuckles were white. "We are not here to offer a defense." Evelyn continued, her tone dropping to a lethal register. "We are here to offer a correction. And because my client speaks the language of data better than anyone in this room, we will let the data speak for itself." Evelyn nodded to me. I pressed a key on my laptop. The large projection screen descended from the ceiling behind the judge's bench. The lights in the courtroom dimmed automatically, a feature of the smart court system that I knew intimately because my company had updated the code for it 6 months ago. "Exhibit A," Evelyn announced. "The incident of violence." On the screen, a timestamp appeared, November 14th, 2022, 7:45 p.m. The video was grainy but clear. It was black and white footage from the security camera in the hallway of the Rodriguez mansion. The angle was high, looking down at the grand staircase. The courtroom watched in silence. On the screen, 2 figures stood at the top of the stairs. One was me, looking thin, hunched, and terrified. The other was Lucas. "The petitioner's claim," Evelyn narrated, "that Joshua Rodriguez violently pushed his brother down the stairs in a psychotic rage. On the video, the digital ghosts played out the scene. Lucas was leaning in close to me, his body language aggressive. I was backing away, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender. I retreated into my bedroom and closed the door. Lucas was left alone in the hallway. He stood there for a moment. Then he looked around to ensure no one was watching. He did not know about the pinhole camera my grandfather had installed inside the smoke detector years ago. The one camera Brenda had forgotten to disable. On the screen, Lucas took a deep breath. He grabbed the banister, and then, with the commitment of a stuntman, he threw himself backward. He tumbled down the stairs, flailing his arms, hitting the landing with a sickening thud. He lay there for 3 seconds, then started screaming for help, clutching his leg. The video froze on Lucas's face as he looked up toward my closed bedroom door, a sneer of triumph visible even in the low resolution. The courtroom erupted. "Oh my God!" someone in the gallery whispered. Lucas jumped up from his seat. "That is fake. That is a deep fake. He edited that." "Sit down," Judge Moore roared, slamming his gavel. "Mr. Rodriguez, if you speak out of turn one more time, I will hold you in contempt." Lucas collapsed back into his chair, his face a mask of panic. My father stared at the screen, his mouth open. He looked at Lucas, then back at the screen. The realization was hitting him like a physical blow. He had banished his son based on a lie he never bothered to verify. "The metadata on this file has been authenticated by an independent forensic expert," Evelyn said, ignoring Lucas's outburst. "It proves that not only is my client innocent of the assault, but the petitioners staged the event to manufacture a pretext for institutionalization." She turned a page in her binder. "Exhibit B," she said. "The motive." The screen changed. This time, it displayed a complex web of financial transactions. It looked like a spider web made of red lines, all converging on a single point. "Why would a wealthy family go to such lengths to imprison their own son?" Evelyn asked rhetorically. "Why the sudden urgency to access a $3.6 million trust fund?" She pointed her cane at the screen. "This is the corporate ledger for Thorne and Rodriguez Holdings," she explained. "Or rather, the real ledger, not the sanitized version filed with the IRS. As you can see, the company has been insolvent for 18 months. I watched Brenda. She had stopped breathing. She was staring at the screen as if it were a monster. "And where did the money go?" Evelyn asked. "Did it go to R&D? Did it go to marketing? No?" The screen zoomed in on a series of wire transfers. It went to Golden Chip Enterprises, Lucky 8 Holdings, and Nevada Sands LLC. Evelyn read the names out loud. "These are not business partners, Your Honor. These are shell companies owned by 3 major casinos in Las Vegas and an illegal sports betting syndicate, operating out of Atlantic City." The numbers flashed on the screen. $50,000, $100,000, $300,000. "Brenda Rodriguez has a gambling debt totaling $2.8 million, Evelyn declared. "She has leveraged the family home. She has drained the company accounts. And the only pot of gold left to keep the loan sharks from breaking her legs was the trust fund belonging to Joshua Rodriguez." The gallery was buzzing now. The reporters in the back row were typing furiously on their phones. This was not a guardianship hearing anymore. It was the public dissection of a socialite. Brenda turned to her lawyer. "Do something," she hissed, her voice shrill and desperate. "Stop her." Sterling stood up, but he looked like a man trying to stop a tsunami with a paper umbrella. "Your Honor, these records, we have not seen them. Privacy laws." "Fraud vitiates all privacy claims, Mr. Sterling." Judge Moore cut him off, his eyes cold. "Sit down." "Exhibit C," Evelyn said relentlessly. "The enabler." The screen shifted again. A single bank transfer receipt appeared. It was dated 3 days ago. "Dr. Holloway testified that he was paid a standard consultation fee," Evelyn said, walking toward the witness stand where the doctor was currently looking for an exit sign. $50,000, an unusually high fee for a 15-minute review of old files. But let us look at the memo line on the wire transfer. The screen zoomed in. The memo field in the SWIFT transfer data that most people think is private but is easily accessible if you know the routing protocols read guardianship testimony/rush job. You received $50,000 to certify a man as schizophrenic without ever seeing him, Evelyn said to Holloway. That is not a medical opinion, doctor. That is a transaction. Holloway slumped in his chair. He did not even try to deny it. He knew the paper trail was lethal. He covered his face with his hands, effectively ending his career in front of 50 witnesses. Evelyn closed her binder. The sound was final. We have proven perjury. We have proven fraud. We have proven conspiracy, she said. But the petitioner's entire argument rests on one final pillar, the claim that Joshua Rodriguez is mentally incompetent and unable to function in society. She turned to me. She stepped aside, giving me the floor. Joshua, she said softly. Finish it. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the center of the room, standing directly in front of the judge's bench. I felt the weight of the room, the eyes of my father, the hate of my stepmother, but I felt no anxiety. I felt only the clarity of code. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. The petitioners claim I cannot manage my own life. They claim I cannot tie my shoelaces or understand the value of $1. They claim I am a burden on society. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small encrypted USB key. I held it up. For the last 3 years, I have not been sleeping on park benches. I've been building. I turned to the screen. I typed a command on my remote. The logo of Aegis Zero appeared a silver shield on a black background. I am the founder and CEO of Aegis Zero, I stated. We are a cybersecurity firm specializing in high-level threat detection for corporate and government infrastructure. A murmur went through the room. Aegis Zero was famous in the tech world. It was a unicorn company valued in the billions, known for its reclusive genius founder, who went by the handle Orion. I am Orion, I said. Lucas let out a choked laugh. Bullshit, he spat. You can't even talk to the pizza delivery guy. I ignored him. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, does this court use the Sentinel secure filing system? I asked. Judge Moore nodded slowly. We do. It was installed last year. I wrote the kernel architecture for Sentinel, I said. In fact, I pushed a security patch to this courthouse's server at 4 a.m. this morning because I noticed a vulnerability in your Wi-Fi encryption. I tapped a key. The screen displayed the court's internal server log. It showed the patch update, authorized by user Orion. The judge looked from the screen to me, his eyes wide with astonishment. You secure my court, he asked. I secure half the Fortune 500, Your Honor, I replied. I walked over to the petitioner's table. I stood 2 feet away from Brenda. She looked small now, withered. The arrogant socialite was gone, replaced by a frightened woman drowning in debt. You said I could not understand the value of $3.6 million, I said to her. I turned back to the room. Last year, Aegis Zero generated revenue of $140 million, I announced, letting the number hang in the air. My personal tax liability, the check I wrote to the IRS last April, was $12 million. I looked at Lucas, then at my father. I paid more in taxes last year than the entire net worth of the Rodriguez family combined. I do not need your trust fund. I do not need your charity. And I certainly do not need a guardian. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. My father was weeping silently, his head bowed. He realized what he had done. He had thrown away a genius. He had sided with a parasite against his own blood, and now he was looking at the titan his son had become without him. But Lucas was not weeping, he was shaking. The humiliation was too much. The retard brother he had tormented, the punching bag he had used to make himself feel big, was now a billionaire standing over him. Something in Lucas snapped. "You lie!" Lucas screamed. It was a primal, animalistic sound. "You are nothing. You are a freak." He launched himself across the table. It happened in slow motion. I saw his muscles bunch. I saw the trajectory. I did not flinch. I did not cower. Evelyn had taught me to read people, and I had seen this coming for minutes. Lucas scrambled over the mahogany table, knocking over the water pitcher, his hands reaching for my throat. "I will kill you," he shrieked. But he never reached me. Two bailiffs were on him before his feet hit the floor. They tackled him mid-air, slamming him onto the carpet. "Get off me," Lucas thrashed, foaming at the mouth, his face purple with rage. "He is the crazy one. Look at him, he is laughing at me." I was not laughing. I was standing perfectly still, my hands clasped behind my back, watching him struggle against the handcuffs clicking around his wrists. "Let the record show," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife, "that the only person in this courtroom exhibiting violent, uncontrolled behavior is the petitioner, Lucas Rodriguez." Judge Moore stood up, his face thunderous. "Bailiffs, secure that man," the judge shouted. "Mr. Rodriguez, you are under arrest for assault and disruption of court proceedings." They hauled Lucas up. He was disheveled, his suit torn, looking wild, and deranged, exactly how they had described me in their opening statement. The projection was complete. As they dragged him toward the side door, Lucas looked back at Brenda. "Mom, help me do something." But Brenda did not move. She sat frozen, staring at the financial chart on the screen, seeing her own doom reflected in the red lines. I turned to my father. He was the only one left at the table. He looked old. So incredibly old. He looked at me, his eyes searching for the son he had known, the boy he had failed. "Joshua," he whispered. I didn't know. I looked at him. I felt a pang of sadness, but it was distant, like a memory of a pain I used to feel. "You did not know because you did not look," I said. "You saw what you wanted to see, Dad. You wanted a broken son because it was easier than loving a complicated one." I turned my back on him. "Justice Vance," I said to Evelyn, "I believe we are done here." "Not quite," Evelyn said, looking at the judge. "We still need the verdict." But we did not need to wait. The look on Judge Moore's face said everything. The hammer was about to fall, and it was going to crush everything the Rodriguez family had built on their foundation of lies. The aftermath of Lucas's arrest was not silence. It was a buzzing, chaotic frequency that vibrated against the wood paneling of the courtroom. The air felt charged with electricity, the kind that precedes a massive lightning strike. Lucas had been dragged out the side door, his screams echoing in the hallway until the heavy wood slammed shut, cutting him off. Now, the room belonged to Judge William Moore. He did not sit down. He remained standing, looming over the bench like an Old Testament god preparing to deliver a plague. He looked at the shattered remnants of the petitioner's table. Brenda was slumped in her chair, her face a mask of gray ash. Mr. Sterling was frantically stuffing papers into his briefcase, his hands shaking so violently that documents were spilling onto the floor. Dr. Holloway was staring at his knees, praying for invisibility. Judge Moore picked up his gavel. He did not bang it. He held it, pointing it directly at Brenda Rodriguez. "In 30 years on the bench," the judge began, his voice low and trembling with controlled fury, "I have seen greed. I have seen malice. I have seen families tear each other apart for a few $1,000s. But never, not once, have I seen a conspiracy so calculated, so cruel, and so brazenly executed in my presence." He turned his gaze to the court reporter. "Let the record reflect," he commanded, "that the petition for guardianship over Joshua Rodriguez is denied with prejudice. There is absolutely no evidence of incapacity. In fact, the respondent has demonstrated a level of competency and success that far exceeds that of his accusers. He took a breath, and the room held its collective breath with him. But we are not done, the judge continued. This court finds probable cause to believe that a criminal conspiracy has been committed to defraud this court and to deprive a citizen of his civil liberties. He pointed to the bailiffs standing by the wall. Officers, take Mrs. Brenda Rodriguez into custody immediately. Brenda let out a gasp that sounded like a dying bird. She scrambled up her chair, clattering backward. No, you cannot do this. I am a victim here. My son just attacked someone. I am a grieving mother. You are a predator, Judge. Moore cut her off, his voice slicing through her hysteria. You are under arrest for perjury, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and the attempted abuse of a vulnerable adult under the Illinois Protection of the Vulnerable statutes. You falsified medical records. You embezzled funds. And you lied to my face. The bailiffs moved in. There was no gentleness this time. They pulled Brenda's hands behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was better than any symphony. It was the music of consequences. Robert! Brenda screamed, turning to my father. Robert, do something. Call someone. Do not let them take me. My father did not move. He sat frozen, staring at the empty space where Lucas had been, his world dissolving into dust. The judge turned his eyes to Dr. Holloway. And you, Judge Moore said, his voice dripping with disgust. You disgraced your oath. You sold a human life for $50,000. Your Honor, I can explain, Holloway stammered, standing up, his face slick with sweat. It was a preliminary assessment. I was misled by the family. Save your explanations for the medical board, the judge snapped. I am ordering an immediate suspension of your license to practice medicine in the state of Illinois, effective this second. I am also referring your file to the district attorney for charges of medical fraud and perjury. Bailiffs take him as well. Holloway slumped his legs, giving out. 2 officers hoisted him up by his expensive suit jacket and marched him toward the holding cell right behind Brenda. Finally, the judge looked at Mr. Sterling. The lawyer was hugging his briefcase to his chest, looking like he wanted to crawl under the table. Mr. Sterling, the judge said quietly, you are an officer of the court. You have a duty to verify the evidence you present. You brought a frivolous, malicious suit based on forged documents. I am filing a formal complaint with the Bar Association this afternoon. Get out of my courtroom before I decide to put you in a cell with your clients. Sterling did not wait. He fled. He actually ran scurrying up the aisle and bursting through the doors, leaving his dignity behind. The room was suddenly quiet. The villains were gone. The threat was neutralized. The $3.6 million was safe, though honestly, that money meant nothing to me now. It was just a number. The real victory was the silence. I began to pack up my laptop. My movements were slow, deliberate. I felt a strange lightness in my chest, as if a heavy stone that had been sitting there for 20 years had finally been lifted. Joshua! The voice was weak, trembling. I turned. My father was standing up. He looked smaller than I remembered. He looked fragile. He was gripping the back of the chair to steady himself. His eyes were red-rimmed with tears that were finally falling. He took a hesitant step toward me. Joshua, he said again, his voice breaking. I did not know. About the company. About Lucas. I swear to you, son. I thought you were sick. I thought I was doing the right thing. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling. Please, he whispered. I am your father. We can fix this. You are brilliant. You are everything my father wanted. Come home. We can rebuild the company. Together. I looked at his hand. It was the same hand that had signed the checks for my medication. It was the same hand that had pointed to the door on that winter night. I felt Evelyn step up beside me. She did not speak. She just stood there, a silent sentinel, letting me handle this on my own. I looked my father in the eye. I felt no anger. I felt no hate. I felt absolutely nothing. He was a stranger to me, a sad, weak stranger who had let a wolf into his house because he was too cowardly to protect his sheep. "You had 32 years," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the empty courtroom it sounded like thunder. "You had 32 years to ask me a single question," I continued. "You had 32 years to look at me and see a person instead of a problem. You had 32 years to be a father." I adjusted my cufflink. "You missed your window, Robert. The vacancy has been filled." "Joshua, please," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive me. I am all alone now. They are gone. I have no one." "You have the truth," I said cold-bloodedly. "I told you. I live with it now, so do you." I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done and also the easiest. It was the final severance of the cord. I walked toward the aisle. Evelyn walked beside me. As we passed the bar, she reached out and placed her hand on my shoulder. She gave it a firm squeeze. "You did well," she said softly, her voice raspy with emotion. "You did very well, son." I stopped. I looked at her. It was the first time she had used that word. It hit me harder than the cold wind in Chicago ever had. It warmed places in my heart I thought were dead forever. "Let us go home," I said to her. We walked out of the double doors. The hallway was a frenzy. The news of the explosive hearing had leaked, probably tweeted by someone in the gallery. A swarm of reporters, photographers, and cameramen were waiting. Flashes exploded in my face like strobe lights. Microphones were thrust toward me like spears. "Mr. Rodriguez, is it true you are the CEO of Aegis Zero?" "Joshua, how do you feel about your mother's arrest?" "Are you going to sue the state? Justice Vance, is this your return to the bench?" The noise was deafening, but I did not flinch. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a pair of black aviator sunglasses. I put them on, shielding my eyes, creating that final barrier between me and the world I no longer feared, but chose not to engage with. I did not say a word. I did not smile. I moved through the crowd like a shark moving through a school of fish. Evelyn walked beside me, using her cane to clear a path, her face set in a look of imperious disdain that made the reporters step back in fear. We pushed through the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and into the bright morning sun. The air was crisp and clean. A sleek black town car was waiting at the curb. The driver, one of my security team from Aegis Zero, opened the door. I helped Evelyn in, then slid into the leather seat beside her. The door closed, sealing out the noise of the press. The silence inside the car was luxurious. "Drive," I said. As the car pulled away, I looked out the tinted window. By the side entrance of the courthouse, a police van was waiting. 2 officers were leading a woman in a black dress toward the back doors. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking. Behind her, a man in a torn suit was being shoved forward, his face pressed against the metal of the van as they patted him down. Brenda and Lucas. I watched them. I watched the steel doors slam shut on their future. I watched the van pull away, taking the toxic waste of my childhood to the place where it belonged. I did not smile. Revenge, I realized, was not about happiness. It was about balance. The ledger was finally balanced. The debt was paid. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I opened it, the screen glowing in the dim interior of the car. I had one last thing to do. I navigated to the admin panel of the Thorne and Rodriguez Holdings server, the back door I had left open for myself years ago, the one that had allowed me to monitor their corruption. I could have drained their remaining accounts. I could have deleted their backups. I could have burned their digital world to the ground. But I was not them. I did not need to destroy them. They had destroyed themselves. I just needed to be free. I typed in a command string. It was a sequence that would permanently sever my biometric signature from their systems, wipe my ghost user profile, and lock the digital gates behind me. System command, purge_user j_rod_ghost execute y/n. I hovered my finger over the enter key. I looked at Evelyn. She was watching me, a look of quiet pride on her face. She nodded once. I pressed the key. The screen flashed green, then black. A single message appeared in white text blinking in the center of the screen. Access denied. I closed the laptop. It is done, I said. Yes, Evelyn replied, looking out at the city skyline passing by. It is. I leaned back in the seat. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air conditioning that smelled of leather and new beginnings. I was 32 years old. I had $3.6 million in a trust fund. I did not need a billion-dollar company I had built from nothing, and a mother who had chosen me not by blood, but by bond. The ghost in the mansion was gone. Joshua Rodriguez was dead. Long live Orion. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Today, are you listening from a busy city subway, a quiet room in the countryside, or maybe during your late-night shift? Please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to Calm Revenge stories like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to be reminded that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest minds. Stay safe, and remember your intellect is your best weapon.